Each testimony builds a stronger case. Every sharp focus reveals clarity. Learning your legal rights, upholding unyielding justice.
Step away from the hydrant! Put down the tool!
Officers, I am a firefighter. I was fixing
Put down the tool! Now!
Okay, I'm putting it down. I'm a firefighter with Station 14. This hydrant was malfunctioning. I repaired it.
You are a firefighter? Where's your uniform, your vehicle?
I'm off duty. I was jogging. I noticed the hydrant was broken. I'm trained in hydrant maintenance.
Turn around, hands behind your back.
It was a sunny Tuesday in April when Officer Kevin Matthews saw something that immediately activated his worst instincts. A black man wearing casual clothes was crouched beside a fire hydrant at the corner of Elm Street and Fifth Avenue in a middle-class residential neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. The man had tools spread around him. There was a wrench, a pipe wrench, and what looked like a valve removed from the hydrant. To Matthews, who had a documented history of racial profiling in his 7 years on the police department, this seemed obvious. A black man with tools next to a damaged hydrant could only mean one thing: vandalism. He didn't even bother asking questions before deciding to make an arrest. What Matthews didn't know, what he didn't bother to investigate, is that the man he was about to handcuff was Captain Marcus Johnson, a 15-year veteran firefighter who was literally doing his job. And everything that happened in the next 20 minutes was captured both by Matthews' body cam and by a neighbor's phone filming from her window, creating irrefutable evidence that would destroy Matthews' career and cost the city of Columbus $3.2 million. Before we dive into this completely insane story, tell me something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, hit that subscribe button because stories like this need to be told. They need to be shared. They need to be shouted so everyone knows this kind of thing still happens every day. You won't want to miss a second of what comes next. Marcus Johnson was 38 years old and one of the most respected people in the Columbus Fire Department. He had joined the department at 23, worked through every rank, saved countless lives, and became captain at 35, one of the fastest promotions in department history. He wasn't just good at fighting fires. He was exceptional at managing teams, making decisions under extreme pressure, keeping equipment functioning when leaves depended on it. His crew loved him. His superiors respected him. The community knew him because he regularly volunteered at schools teaching fire safety. Marcus was exactly the kind of public servant every city should be proud to have. He grew up in Columbus, son of a mechanic and a nurse, learned early about hard work and community service. He had been married for 12 years, had 2 kids, and lived 3 blocks from the fire station where he worked. On that specific Tuesday, Marcus wasn't officially on duty, but was doing something dedicated firefighters often do. He was performing preventive maintenance. The fire station had received a report that the hydrant at the corner of Elm and Fifth wasn't working properly during a routine check the previous week. The city's maintenance crew was backlogged, and Marcus knew that in his profession, a hydrant that doesn't work could mean the difference between saving a house or watching it burn completely. So he grabbed his own tools, drove to the location on his day off, and started diagnosing the problem. He had identified that the main valve was defective, removed it for closer examination, and was in the process of cleaning it when Matthews showed up. Marcus was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He wasn't in uniform because he wasn't officially on duty. His firefighter ID was in his pocket. His truck, clearly marked with a Columbus Fire Department sticker, was parked 6 meters away. His tools were all standard professional tools any maintenance technician would use. For any reasonable observer who actually looked, all the context screamed, professional doing legitimate work. But Matthews wasn't a reasonable observer. He was a cop with a history of seeing criminal threats where none existed, especially when those threats had dark skin. Marcus was so focused on the hydrant that he didn't immediately notice the patrol car approaching. When he heard Matthews' voice demanding to know what he was doing, he looked up with genuine surprise. He calmly explained he was a firefighter, that the hydrant was defective, and that he was fixing it. Matthews didn't believe him. Or maybe didn't want to believe. He demanded to see identification, but in the way cops do when they've already decided you're guilty. Marcus said his ID was in his pocket and started to reach for it, but Matthews shouted for him to stop moving and put his hands where he could see them. Marcus complied, confused and starting to realize this was escalating dangerously. He pointed to his truck, saying it had the fire department sticker, that his uniform was in the back seat, that they could call the fire station and confirm who he was. Matthews ignored all of this. He said Marcus fit the description of someone who had been reported vandalizing hydrants in the neighborhood, which was a complete lie Matthews made up on the spot. There were no reports. There was no series of vandalisms. There was just a cop who saw a black man with tools and assumed crime. Matthews' body cam captured everything from the moment he exited the patrol car. The video clearly showed Marcus crouched peacefully beside the hydrant, tools organized, working methodically. It showed Marcus's truck with the visible fire department sticker. It showed Marcus trying to explain, trying to cooperate, trying to de-escalate, and it showed Matthews refusing to listen, becoming more aggressive, his hand moving to his weapon when Marcus tried to reach his pocket for ID. The situation was getting dangerous fast. Marcus, with years of crisis management training, realized that arguing could make this fatal. He knew the statistics. He knew how many black men had been shot during police encounters for not complying. So he made the decision to simply cooperate, no matter how absurd this was, and sort it out later. Matthews ordered Marcus to turn around and put his hands behind his back. Marcus complied, his voice still calm, but now tinged with disbelief about what was happening. He continued explaining he was a fire captain, that he was performing routine maintenance, that this was a huge misunderstanding. Matthews wasn't interested in explanations. He pulled out his handcuffs and snapped them around Marcus's wrists, tightening them with unnecessary force. The body cam captured Marcus wincing at the metal grip on his skin. Matthews began reciting Miranda rights, treating Marcus like any common criminal while completely ignoring all protests. Marcus asked multiple times if Matthews had even looked at his truck, if he had noticed the fire department sticker, if he could call the station and verify. Each question was ignored or dismissed with a curt command to be quiet. It was at this moment that Jennifer Wong, a 67-year-old retired teacher who lived in the house across from the hydrant, noticed what was happening. She had seen Marcus working on the hydrant from her kitchen window and had thought how good it was to see someone finally fixing it. When she saw the patrol car appear and the officer handcuff Marcus, she immediately knew something was terribly wrong. She grabbed her cell phone and started filming from the window, capturing a different angle that Matthews' body cam didn't show. Her video caught Marcus's expression, the genuine frustration and fear on his face as he tried to make a cop understand he was a firefighter. Jennifer shouted from the window, telling the officer the man was telling the truth, that she had seen him working professionally for over an hour. Matthews shouted back for her to go inside and not interfere with police matters, or she would also be arrested for obstruction. Marcus was led to the patrol car, his hands still cuffed behind his back. Matthews searched him aggressively, finding Marcus's wallet in his back pocket. Inside the wallet was Marcus's official identification as captain of the Columbus Fire Department, with photo, ID number, and his captain's badge clearly visible. Matthews looked at it. The body cam captured the exact moment where he examined the ID, clearly saw it said Captain and Fire Department. For a brief second, you could see in the footage that he realized his mistake, but instead of admitting he had made a terrible error, instead of immediately releasing Marcus and apologizing, Matthews doubled down. He claimed the ID could be fake, that he would check after they got to the station, and push Marcus into the back seat of the patrol car. The decision not to back down at that moment transformed what could have been an embarrassing mistake into a civil rights violation that would ruin his career. While Marcus sat in the back of the patrol car, handcuffed and processing the absurdity of what was happening, Jennifer continued filming. She grabbed her home phone and called the fire station, asking if they had a Captain Marcus Johnson and if he would be working on a hydrant today. The dispatcher immediately confirmed yes, that Captain Johnson had reported he would be performing preventive maintenance on his day off. Jennifer explained he was being arrested by an officer accusing him of vandalism. The dispatcher was shocked and said he would notify the department chief immediately. In less than 5 minutes, Fire Chief Harold Stevens was on the phone with the police captain supervising that area, demanding to know why one of his captains was being arrested for doing his job. Police Captain Thomas Rivera knew nothing about this and immediately tried to contact Matthews by radio. Matthews was at that moment going through Marcus's tools, photographing them as evidence of the alleged vandalism. When his radio crackled with Captain Rivera demanding a situation update, Matthews responded that he had made an arrest for destruction of public property and was processing the scene. Rivera specifically asked if the suspect had identified himself as emergency personnel. Matthews hesitated, a hesitation the body cam captured perfectly, before responding that the suspect had made such a claim, but he was verifying the truthfulness. Rivera, who had already been informed by Chief Stevens that a fire captain was being arrested, said something that made Matthews freeze. He ordered Matthews to immediately check the suspect's identification and report if there was any indication the man was actually fire personnel. Matthews had no choice. He went back to the patrol car and grabbed Marcus's ID again, this time having to admit over the radio that yes, the suspect had fire department identification, claiming to be a captain. Rivera's response was immediate and furious. He ordered Matthews to release Marcus from handcuffs immediately and remain at the location until supervision arrived. But the damage was already done. Marcus had been handcuffed for almost 15 minutes at that point. 15 minutes of humiliation, of being treated like a criminal, of having his explanations ignored and his dignity destroyed. When Matthews opened the patrol car door and started removing the handcuffs, he mumbled something about a misunderstanding. Marcus didn't respond. He was too furious to trust himself to speak. He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had left red marks, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on some distant point while trying to control his emotions. Jennifer continued filming everything, capturing Marcus's expression when released, the lack of any real apology from Matthews, the way Matthews avoided eye contact. 2 vehicles arrived almost simultaneously in the next 5 minutes. One was a fire department SUV, bringing Chief Stevens and another captain. The other was a supervisor patrol car bringing Captain Rivera. Both men exited their vehicles, and the conversation that followed was captured both by Matthew's body cam and Jennifer's phone. Stevens went straight to Marcus, asking if he was okay, if he had been injured. Marcus said he was physically fine, but completely shocked by what had just happened. Stevens then turned to Matthews with barely contained fury in his voice. He explained that Marcus was one of the most decorated firefighters in the department, that he was performing essential preventive maintenance that the city should be doing, but wasn't, and that handcuffing him for doing public service was outrageous. Matthews tried to defend himself, saying he thought Marcus was a vandal, that he was just doing his job. Stevens pointed to Marcus's truck, the clearly visible fire department sticker, and asked how any reasonable person could see that and not ask at least one basic question before arresting someone. Captain Rivera pulled Matthews aside for a tense conversation that the body cam still captured in audio. Rivera asked in a low but furious voice why Matthews hadn't checked the ID immediately when Marcus claimed to be a firefighter. Matthews tried to explain he thought Marcus was lying, that he looked suspicious. Rivera cut him off, asking what exactly looked suspicious about a man with professional tools next to a defective hydrant, with a fire department marked truck a few meters away. Matthews had no good answer. He mumbled something about following his gut. Rivera said gut wasn't a substitute for basic police work, that Matthews had just handcuffed a fire captain for doing preventive maintenance that benefited the entire community, and that this was going to result in serious consequences. Matthews started to realize he had made a career-ending mistake, but still tried to minimize, suggesting they could just let Marcus go and consider the matter closed. Marcus heard this and finally spoke, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. He said no, this absolutely wasn't closed. He had been handcuffed, treated like a criminal, had his explanations ignored, and been humiliated in front of his community for doing his job. He pointed to cameras on surrounding houses, to Jennifer still filming from her window, and said he hoped every second was documented because he would ensure there was accountability. Stevens put his hand on Marcus's shoulder in solidarity and said the fire department would support Marcus completely in whatever action he decided to take. He looked directly at Matthews and Rivera and made clear this wasn't just about a firefighter being mistreated. It was about racial profiling, about a cop seeing a black man and assuming criminal without doing any real investigation. The mention of race made Matthews recoil defensively. He said race had nothing to do with it, that he would have done the same thing with anyone he saw messing with public property. Stevens didn't let that pass. He asked if Matthews regularly handcuffed white maintenance technicians working on public equipment. He asked if Matthews had arrested the water company workers fixing pipes on the next street last week. He asked if Matthews had a pattern of approaching black citizens with more aggression than white ones. Matthews didn't respond, but his red face and defensive body language spoke volumes. Rivera, realizing the situation was quickly becoming a major public relations incident, tried to control damage by suggesting everyone go back to the department and discuss this calmly. Marcus refused. He said he would finish fixing the hydrant because families depended on it working, and then he would deal with what happened through appropriate channels. Jennifer Wong came down from her house, still holding her phone, and approached the group. She identified herself as a witness and said she had filmed the entire interaction. She offered to provide her video to whoever needed it, and specifically told Marcus she would testify in any lawsuit about what she saw. She described watching Matthews ignore Marcus's explanations, refuse to check the truck, and handcuff Marcus without proper investigation. Jennifer, who was a retired teacher and had lived in that neighborhood for 35 years, said she had seen Matthews patrol the area for years, and this wasn't the first problematic incident involving him and black residents. She mentioned he had stopped her neighbor's teenage son 3 times last year for suspicious behavior that consisted of riding a bicycle. She said the community had complained about Matthews before, but nothing ever happened. This information made Rivera look even more uncomfortable. He knew if this went to trial and there was a documented pattern of problematic behavior, the department would face massive liability. He tried to take Jennifer's contact information, promising there would be a full investigation. Jennifer, with the attitude of someone who had seen many empty promises, said she would provide her information directly to Marcus's lawyers when he decided to sue. Stevens watched this exchange with a grim expression. He knew the system. He knew internal investigations rarely resulted in real consequences unless there was significant public pressure. He told Marcus the fire department had lawyers who specialized in civil rights and would connect Marcus with them immediately. He also said he would make this public, that the community needed to know one of their firefighters had been treated like this. Marcus thanked Stevens and Jennifer, then turned to the hydrant and simply went back to work. The image of him, a fire captain with red handcuff marks still visible on his wrists, calmly crouching down to continue fixing equipment that would save lives while the cop who unjustly arrested him stood there awkwardly watching, was powerful. Jennifer continued filming. She captured Marcus working professionally and methodically checking the valve he had removed, cleaning it, reinstalling it, testing water pressure. It took him another 25 minutes to complete the repair while a small crowd gathered. Neighbors started coming out of their houses, having heard what happened or seen the patrol cars. Several recognized Marcus from community events or from seeing him work in the neighborhood. They expressed shock and anger about what had happened. One of the neighbors, James Peterson, a 71-year-old retired lawyer, approached Marcus and offered free legal advice. He said he had practiced civil rights law for 40 years before retiring, and that what happened to Marcus was a textbook case of false arrest, Fourth Amendment violation, and possibly racial profiling. He explained that the fact Matthews had seen Marcus's fire captain's ID, but still chosen to keep him handcuffed and detained, made the case even stronger. He said the body cam in Jennifer's video were gold evidence that would make any defense practically impossible. James gave Marcus his card and said to call when he was ready to take action. Marcus thanked him, putting the card in his pocket while tightening the last bolt on the hydrant. When finished, he tested it again, and water flowed strong and clear. The hydrant was fixed. He had completed the work he came to do, despite being arrested in the process. Matthews and Rivera were still there. Matthews now sitting in his patrol car looking defeated. Rivera taking notes for what presumably would be his report. Stevens told Marcus they could leave, but Marcus had one last thing to do. He walked to the patrol car where Matthews sat and knocked on the window. Matthews rolled it down slowly. Marcus looked directly at him and said something the body cam captured perfectly. He said he hoped Matthews thought about this day every time he saw a firefighter, every time he needed the fire department to save someone, every time he benefited from public servants doing their job. He said Matthews had assumed the worst about him, based on nothing but his skin color, and that this kind of policing not only ruined individual lives, but eroded trust between law enforcement and the communities they supposedly served. Marcus then walked away without waiting for a response, collected his tools, and drove away with Stevens following behind him. The story exploded in the first 24 hours. Jennifer Wong sent her video to 3 local news stations before Marcus even got home. The fire department, following Stevens' promise to make this public, issued a press release describing what had happened and condemning the unjust arrest of one of their most respected captains. By sunset that Tuesday, Jennifer's video was playing on every local newscast. The image of Marcus in his simple gray t-shirt, kneeling beside the hydrant with tools organized around him, being handcuffed while trying to explain he was a firefighter, resonated with everyone who saw it. There was no ambiguity, no interpretation needed. You could see and hear everything clearly. A fire captain doing preventive maintenance on his day off, being arrested by a cop who refused to do the most basic investigation before handcuffing someone. Social media exploded. The video was shared tens of thousands of times in the first hours. Hashtags like Justice for Marcus and Firefighters Matter started trending locally, then nationally. People were outraged. Comments flooded the Columbus Police Department's social media pages demanding Matthews be fired immediately. The Firefighters Union issued a strong statement supporting Marcus and demanding full accountability. Other first responder organizations across the country started sharing the story, expressing solidarity with Marcus and concern that if a fire captain could be arrested for doing his job, what message did that send about how first responders were valued and respected? Local politicians started making statements, calling for reforms in policing practices and better training on racial profiling. Marcus spent that first night at home with his wife Tamara and his 2 kids processing what had happened. Tamara was furious and scared at the same time, furious at the treatment her husband had received, scared thinking about what could have happened if Marcus had reacted differently, or if Matthews had been even more aggressive. Their kids, ages 9 and 12, asked difficult questions about why Daddy was arrested when he was helping people. Marcus tried to explain in an age-appropriate way about prejudice and how some people make assumptions based on skin color. It was a conversation no parent should have to have, but one black parents have with their children repeatedly. Tamara hugged Marcus and said that regardless of what he decided to do, she would support him completely. If he wanted to sue, she was with him. If he wanted to make this a bigger public issue, she was with him. If he wanted to just try to move on, though she doubted that was possible, she would support that too. Wednesday morning, Marcus went to fire department headquarters to meet with Stevens and union lawyers. The legal team had spent the night reviewing Matthew's body cam and Jennifer's video. Their verdict was unanimous. Marcus had one of the most solid civil rights cases they'd ever seen. The video evidence was irrefutable. Matthews had handcuffed Marcus without probable cause. He had seen the official fire captain ED, but chosen to keep Marcus detained anyway. He had ignored obvious context, like the fire department marked truck and professional tools, and he had done all of this while his body cam recorded every second. The lawyers explained Marcus could sue both Matthews personally and the city of Columbus, seeking compensatory damages for false arrest and emotional distress, plus punitive damages intended to punish the misconduct and deter similar future behavior. They estimated the case could be worth millions, but the lawyers were also honest about what a lawsuit would mean. It would mean potentially years of legal battle. It would mean depositions and interrogatories and reliving the incident repeatedly. It would mean media scrutiny and public attention. It would mean Marcus's life largely becoming about being the firefighter who was arrested, rather than about his actual work-saving lives. Marcus heard all this and said he needed time to think. He asked about other options. Could the police department be pressured to make changes without a lawsuit? The lawyers said internal investigations rarely resulted in significant changes without external pressure. The police union typically protected officers even when they had clearly acted wrongly. Without real financial consequences or sustained media attention, probably not much would happen beyond maybe a brief suspension period for Matthews. Marcus asked about criminal charges. The lawyers explained that while what Matthews did was illegal, prosecutors rarely criminally charge police for actions taken while on duty, no matter how unjustified. Marcus left that meeting feeling heavy. He had become a firefighter because he wanted to help people, save lives, make a positive difference. Now he was confronting whether he should spend the next years of his life in legal battles. But as he drove back home, he thought about the expression on Jennifer Wong's face when she came down from her house to testify to what she had seen. He thought about James Peterson offering help because he had spent decades fighting for civil rights. He thought about the support messages flooding in from firefighters across the country. And he thought about his kids asking why Daddy was arrested. If he did nothing, what would that teach them? That you just accept injustice? That people with power can abuse it without consequences? Marcus decided he would sue, not because he wanted money or attention, but because silence was complicity. Thursday morning, Marcus held a press conference on the fire station steps. Media showed up in force, cameras from all local stations, newspaper journalists, even some national outlets that had picked up the story. Marcus, wearing his full firefighter uniform with his captain's insignias clearly visible, read a prepared statement. He described what had happened on Tuesday, not with anger but with factual clarity. He explained he had served the city of Columbus for 15 years, that he loved his job, that he was proud to be a firefighter. He said on Tuesday he was doing exactly what firefighters do, keeping life-saving equipment functioning, and that for doing that he was handcuffed, treated like a criminal, and had his dignity destroyed. He said he was filing a lawsuit not for revenge but for accountability, because systems that allow this kind of abuse without consequences are systems that need to change. Marcus also spoke directly about race. He said he had no illusions about why Matthews had approached him the way he did. There was obvious context any reasonable officer would have noticed: the fire department marked truck, the professional tools, his willingness to explain and provide identification. Matthews had ignored all of that because he saw a black man and assumed criminal. Marcus said this kind of racial profiling wasn't just unfair to individuals, it was dangerous for entire communities. It eroded trust between police and the people they served. It made people of color fear interactions with law enforcement even when they had done nothing wrong. And it perpetuated stereotypes that painted black men as inherently suspicious. Marcus finished his statement saying he hoped his case would lead not just to compensation for him, but to real changes in how officers were trained, supervised, and held accountable when they abused their power. The federal lawsuit was officially filed the following Monday, exactly 6 days after the incident. Marcus's legal team, led by James Peterson's office, which had come out of retirement specifically for this case, prepared a devastating 67-page petition. The document not only detailed what had happened that Tuesday, but placed it in context of a broader pattern. The team had done extensive research on Matthews' history and discovered what Jennifer Wong had suggested. This wasn't an isolated incident. In Matthews' 7 years on the Columbus Police Department, he had accumulated 14 citizen complaints, 11 of which involved people of color alleging racial profiling or excessive force. Only 2 of these complaints had resulted in any discipline, and both were just written warnings. The lawsuit argued the department had failed to adequately supervise Matthews, allowing a pattern of problematic behavior to continue unchecked. The lawsuit named Matthews personally, seeking damages for false arrest, emotional distress, and violation of Marcus's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. It also named the City of Columbus and Police Department, arguing that systemic failures in training, supervision, and accountability had created an environment where misconduct like Matthews's was tolerated. Damages sought totaled $5 million. But the petition made clear money wasn't the primary goal. Attached to the lawsuit was a list of policy changes Marcus demanded, including mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, improved system for tracking and investigating complaints, more severe consequences for officers with patterns of problematic behavior, and creation of an independent civilian review board to review police misconduct cases. The petition argued that without these systemic changes, other Columbus citizens would continue experiencing the same kind of racial profiling and abuse of power Marcus had suffered. The police department's response was initially defensive. Their spokesperson issued a statement saying they took all accusations seriously and that Matthews had been placed on administrative leave pending full internal investigation. But they also tried to frame the incident as an isolated misunderstanding rather than symptom of larger problems. This narrative didn't withstand public scrutiny. Investigative journalists started digging deeper into Matthews's history, confirming the pattern of complaints Marcus's team had discovered. A local newspaper published an investigation showing officers in Matthews' district had stopped and searched black residents at disproportionately higher rates than white residents, even when controlling for crime and demographics. The department was forced to admit it had opportunities for improvement in its practices, which was essentially an admission that systemic problems existed. Matthews was interviewed as part of the internal investigation, and portions of his deposition eventually leaked to media. In his explanation of the incident, he claimed he had acted based on training and standard protocols, that he had perceived suspicious activity and investigated appropriately. But when pressed about why he hadn't checked the clearly marked fire department truck, or why he kept Marcus handcuffed, even after seeing the official captain ID, his answers became vague and contradictory. He claimed the ID could have been fake, but admitted he hadn't taken any real steps to verify its authenticity beyond eventually calling on his radio. He claimed the situation was fluid and potentially dangerous, but couldn't articulate what specific danger an unarmed man kneeling by a hydrant presented. His deposition revealed what many already suspected. He had handcuffed Marcus based on nothing more than prejudice, then tried to retroactively justify his actions when confronted with how wrong he was. Public pressure on the department intensified when national civil rights organizations got involved. The NAACP sent representatives to Columbus to meet with city leaders and demand reform. Ohio's ACLU issued a detailed report on racial profiling in Columbus, using Marcus's case as prime example of how discriminatory practices persisted despite years of community complaints. Protests were organized outside police headquarters, with firefighters in uniform joining community activists to demand Matthews be fired and systemic changes be implemented. National media attention fixed on Columbus, with major outlets sending reporters to cover what was being framed as a test case about whether police departments could be held accountable for racial profiling. Columbus's mayor, facing re-election the following year, felt the political pressure and announced formation of a task force to review policing practices and recommend reforms. As the legal case progressed and public attention continued, Marcus's personal life was transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. He received hundreds of support messages from firefighters and other first responders across the country, many sharing their own stories of racial profiling and discrimination. But he also received threats and hateful comments from people who saw him as causing trouble or playing the race card. He needed increased security at his home after threatening messages were left in his mailbox. His kids had to deal with questions and comments from peers at school. Tamara struggled with anxiety every time Marcus left for work, worried about what might happen now that he had become a public figure. Marcus questioned his decision multiple times, wondering if the personal cost was worth it. But then he would receive a message from a young aspiring black firefighter saying Marcus's courage had inspired him, or hear about another department implementing better bias training because of the attention his case had brought, and he knew he had made the right choice. The lawsuit's discovery revealed even more problems within the police department. Through public records requests and subpoenas, Marcus's team obtained internal emails, training reports, and personnel files that painted a disturbing picture. The department had failed to discipline Matthews appropriately despite multiple red flags. There was evidence supervisors knew about his problematic behavior, but had chosen to look the other way. Emails showed fellow officers had expressed concerns about how Matthews interacted with black residents, but these concerns were never formally investigated. The department's training on implicit bias and racial profiling was minimal, basically a 2-hour online session officers completed while multitasking. There was little meaningful supervision of officers in the field, few systems in place to identify patterns of problematic behavior before they escalated into incidents like Marcus's. All this evidence strengthened Marcus's argument that his case wasn't about one bad officer, but about systemic failures that allowed and even encouraged such behavior. 8 months after the original incident, the city of Columbus made a settlement offer. It was substantial, $3.2 million for Marcus personally, permanent termination of Matthews with certification revocation that would prevent him from working in law enforcement anywhere in the state, and commitment to implement comprehensive list of reforms. The reforms included mandatory 40-hour training on implicit bias and de-escalation for all officers, creation of independent community oversight office with power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline, improved system for tracking officer behavior patterns, and policy changes requiring officers to verify identification before making arrests in cases of alleged vandalism or minor property crimes. The settlement also included the department's commitment to publish quarterly public data on stops, searches, and arrests disaggregated by race, allowing ongoing oversight of potential disparities. Marcus accepted the settlement after lengthy discussions with his family and legal team. It wasn't an easy decision. Part of him wanted to go to trial, wanted to force the police department to publicly face every piece of evidence of their systemic failures. But the more pragmatic part of him recognized the policy changes in the settlement were comprehensive and binding, that $3.2 million would allow him to create lasting change through other means, and that going to trial would mean additional years of his life consumed by legal battles. Tamara put it simply. He had proven his point. Matthews was losing his career permanently. The department was being forced to reform. The story had been told nationally. Sometimes victory doesn't look dramatic. It just means things get a little better than they were before. Marcus signed the settlement papers on a Thursday, 14 months after being handcuffed while fixing a hydrant. Matthews never worked in law enforcement again. With his certification revoked by the state of Ohio, he was effectively banned from the profession he had held for 7 years. He tried to get work in private security, but his involvement in the highly publicized case made him radioactive to employers. A quick Google search of his name brought up dozens of articles about how he had arrested a fire captain for fixing public equipment, all captured on video from multiple angles. He tried moving to another state, but the story followed him. Eventually, he ended up in a warehouse job, earning a fraction of what he used to make as an officer. Some felt sorry for him, arguing one mistake shouldn't destroy someone's entire life. But others, including Marcus, pointed out this wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior the department had ignored until it couldn't anymore. Matthews had had 14 opportunities through those complaints to change his behavior, to confront his biases, to become a better officer. He had chosen not to, and choices have consequences. The settlement money allowed Marcus to create the First Responders for Justice Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal support and advocacy for first responders who experience discrimination or retaliation. The foundation offered free legal assistance, training on rights during law enforcement encounters, and platform for sharing discrimination stories that would otherwise remain untold. In the first 3 years, the foundation helped 67 firefighters, paramedics, and other first responders across the country who had faced racial profiling, retaliation for reporting misconduct, or discrimination of various types. Marcus put significant portion of his personal time and settlement financial resources into the foundation, transforming his trauma into something that could help others. He said in interviews that if something positive had to come from being handcuffed while doing his job, it would be ensuring the next first responder who faced discrimination had resources to fight back. The reforms implemented by Columbus Police Department were extensively monitored by both the newly created Community Oversight Office and civil rights organizations. The 40-hour training on implicit bias and de-escalation became mandatory for all officers, with annual refresher required. The department began publishing quarterly data on stops, searches, and arrests by race, and this data showed gradual improvements in disparities over time. The Community Oversight Office proved to be an effective tool, investigating complaints more thoroughly and recommending discipline in cases where previous internal investigations would likely have resulted in nothing. It wasn't perfect. There was pushback from some officers and the police union, but there was measurable progress, and other departments in Ohio and beyond started looking at the Columbus model when implementing their own reforms, using Marcus's case as example of what happens when systemic failures aren't addressed. Jennifer Wong became an accidental activist in her retirement years. Her video of Marcus's incident had been viewed millions of times, and she received requests from civil rights groups to speak about the importance of witnesses documenting police misconduct. She started giving workshops in her community about how to safely film police encounters, what rights witnesses have, and how to provide video evidence that's usable in court. She said that for decades as a teacher, she had taught students about civil rights and justice, but never imagined at 67 she would become directly involved in a case that would demonstrate why these principles still mattered. Jennifer and Marcus became close friends, occasionally appearing together at community events to talk about their roles in the story. Jennifer always emphasized she didn't do anything heroic. She simply documented what she saw. But Marcus pointed out that in a world where misconduct often happens without witnesses or records, choosing to document and come forward is act of courage. Marcus continued working as fire captain, promoted to battalion chief 3 years after the incident. His reputation within the department, which was already strong, became even more solid when fellow firefighters saw how he had handled an impossible situation with dignity and determination. He used his elevated platform to advocate for more diversity in firefighter recruitment and better training, on implicit bias within the fire department too. He noted that while his case was about racial profiling by police, bias exists in all institutions, and fire departments weren't immune. He led initiatives to make the fire department more welcoming for firefighters of color and to improve how emergency crews interacted with diverse communities. His work gained national recognition, and he was invited to speak at conferences about leadership in emergency services and justice in first responders. The hydrant at the corner of Elm Street and Fifth Avenue became a kind of informal landmark. People occasionally stopped to take photos of it, knowing the story of what happened there. A local artist even painted a mural on a nearby building depicting Marcus in firefighter uniform beside the hydrant, with words, "Serve with dignity," underneath. The hydrant continues working perfectly, maintained now both by the city's regular maintenance crew and by Marcus, who still occasionally checks on it in his free time. He says he feels personal responsibility for that specific hydrant, not because it was where something bad happened, but because it represents something important about commitment to public service, even when that service isn't recognized or is actively punished. Marcus's story resonated beyond just police reform. It became part of larger conversations about how society values different types of work, about who is presumed to belong in public spaces, about how racial prejudice persists even in seemingly mundane interactions. Academics wrote papers analyzing the case as example of how implicit bias operates. Police training schools use the body cam and Jennifer's videos as teaching tools about what not to do. Fire departments discussed in training sessions about how their members should respond if facing similar discrimination. The case became bigger than Marcus, bigger than Matthews, bigger than Columbus. It became reference point in ongoing discussions about justice, equity, and accountability. And at the heart of it all was simple but powerful image of black man in gray t-shirt, kneeling beside hydrant with tools spread around, just trying to do his job, and system that initially punished him for it, before evidence and public pressure forced change. Sometimes justice prevails, not always quickly, not always completely. But when it prevails, it should be documented, celebrated, and used as foundation to ensure it prevails more often in the future.
Equity is an ongoing path, and information is your greatest armor. We appreciate your viewership and dedication to undeniable truth.